It was late June of 2014, and I had taken a few days off work to clear my head. I was 29 at the time, living in a small flat in Cambridge, and everything in life had started to feel a little boxed in. The daily routine, the traffic, the same roads, the same faces. It just got under my skin. I'd always found peace in the outdoors, and I'd camped alone a few times before, mostly in the Peak District or up in Northumberland. But this time I wanted something closer, something quieter. I chose Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk. I didn't know it too well, but it looked perfect on the map. Loads of thick woodland, not far from the coast, and enough space to feel isolated without being miles from civilization. I packed light, tent, stove, some cans, noodles, torch, a hunting knife I always took when I camped alone, even if I never really needed it. Just one of those things that gave me peace of mind. I drove up early on a Wednesday morning and arrived by noon. The roads were empty, the weather was mild, and the sun sat behind a thick cover of clouds, just how I liked it. I left my car in a small clearing a few miles off one of the B roads that cut through the woods, and I hiked a bit deeper, maybe 30 or 40 minutes with my gear on my back, until I found a flat patch of ground tucked between two low hills covered in bracken and tall trees. There was a small trail nearby, but it didn't look well used. I set up camp and cooked my lunch. Everything felt calm. The first night went fine. It got cold as expected, but I had enough layers. I slept light, waking up to the sounds of owls and rustling undergrowth. That's normal out here, deer, rabbits, maybe the odd fox. I wasn't nervous. In fact, I felt more relaxed than I had in months. It was sometime late the next afternoon when I saw the man. I'd gone walking off trail, weaving between the trees, trying to get a better sense of the area before it got dark. I didn't go far, maybe 25 minutes from my tent. I was walking along a dry stream bed, crouching every now and then to look at some old deer tracks in the mud, when I felt like something had shifted in the air. That quiet stillness had turned into something else. It was subtle. I stopped walking and just listened. That's when I saw him. He was standing a little way up the hill, partly behind a tree. Not completely hidden, not completely in the open. I wouldn't have seen him if I hadn't stopped. He wasn't moving, just standing there, half covered by the trunk. He was wearing dark clothes, black jacket, maybe navy trousers, and a hood pulled up over his head. I couldn't make out much of his face, just pale skin. He wasn't looking directly at me, but I knew he was aware of me. You can tell. Something in the way his body was angled. Still, intentional. I stared for a few seconds, then looked away like it was nothing. I kept walking slowly along the bed of the stream like I hadn't noticed him. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to show I was rattled. I moved steadily, took a turn around some thick bushes, and then once I was out of sight, I picked up the pace and looped back toward my camp from a wider angle. I tried not to panic, but my skin was crawling. I told myself maybe he was just another hiker, maybe even a camper like me. It wasn't illegal to be here, but something was off. It wasn't just that he was standing there, it was the way he stood. Not like someone taking a break or watching wildlife. It felt deliberate, like he wanted me to see him, but not really. When I got back to camp, everything was untouched. My tent was fine, my bag, my gear, all exactly as I'd left them. That should have settled me down, but it didn't. I didn't light a fire that night. I cooked inside my tent with the flap zipped mostly shut and ate fast. The woods were quiet again, but now I kept listening for footsteps. A snap of a twig. Anything. That night I barely slept. Every noise made me sit up. I didn't unzip the tent, not once. I kept my knife close, and I lay in my sleeping bag fully dressed. I must have drifted off a few times because I remember dreaming blurry, uncomfortable dreams. One was about hearing something breathing right outside the tent, but that might have been real. I don't know. It was all mixed up. Morning came eventually, cloudy again, a bit colder. I got up and checked the area.
No footprints.
No damage, just wet grass and leaf litter. I made a quick breakfast, packed some snacks, and tried to clear my head with a long walk toward the east side of the forest. I stayed on wider trails this time, places I figured would be harder to sneak up on. For a while it worked. I started to feel a bit better, like maybe I'd overreacted. It was on my way back, late in the afternoon, when I found the marks. They weren't deep and they weren't new, but they were strange. Near the edge of my camp, on the backside of a tree facing away from the trail, someone had carved a shape, a rough triangle with 3 vertical lines inside it. I hadn't seen it when I first set up, but I swear it hadn't been there yesterday. The bark was cut fresh. It wasn't just random vandalism. It looked like someone's sign, like a mark. It wasn't deep, but it was clean, deliberate. I looked around the surrounding trees. I found 2 more symbols carved the same way, spaced evenly in a loose circle around the tent. That was enough for me. I packed up right then. I was sweating the whole time, even though the wind had picked up and the temperature had dropped. I kept checking over my shoulder every few seconds, expecting to see someone standing there watching. But I didn't, just trees and wind. The woods were too quiet again. I started hiking back toward where I'd left the car. It was maybe an hour's walk, but I was moving fast. The trail was a bit overgrown in places, and the light was dropping fast, turning everything gray. About halfway back, I stopped. I don't even know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe I heard something my brain didn't process properly. I just stopped. Ahead of me, about 50 yards up the trail, the same man was standing there. This time fully visible. Same dark jacket, same hood. He was facing away from me, looking into the woods, but his posture was stiff, like he was waiting. I stood completely still. I didn't move. My heart was hammering, and I could feel my breath shaking in my chest. After what felt like forever, he turned just slightly. Not all the way, just enough to let me know he knew I was there. Then, very slowly, he stepped off the trail and vanished into the trees. I didn't follow. I took a wide arc through the brush and made my way toward the car without using the trail. I cut my legs and arms on brambles, slipped once in a patch of moss, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. When I reached the clearing where I'd parked, the car was there, untouched. I got in, locked the doors, and drove without checking the mirrors until I hit the main road. I didn't stop until I was 2 towns over. I didn't go to the police. I didn't know what to report. A man standing in the woods? A few symbols on trees? It would have sounded like paranoia. Maybe it was. But I've never gone camping alone since then. Not once. For weeks after, I kept checking my front door at night, watching for shadows in the street, listening for footsteps in the hall. Nothing ever came of it. But sometimes, even now, I wake up at night thinking I hear the crunch of boots on dry leaves. It's always in the background of my dreams. Silent trees, cold air, and someone just out of sight. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he was dangerous or just disturbed. But I know this, he was watching me. He knew where I was, and he wanted me to see him. That was enough. I was 36 the summer I decided to camp out at an old quarry near a small town called Elmsworth, just a couple hours northwest of Bristol. It was 2021, and I had just come off a long stretch of warehouse work. My back was killing me most days. I didn't have much to look forward to except for my weekend fishing trips or watching football with my neighbor downstairs, so I figured I'd break the cycle a bit. I'd heard about this place from an old coworker, back when I used to help with landscaping. He mentioned a hidden quarry where he'd sometimes hike with his dogs. Said no one really went there anymore since the access road washed out a few years back. I liked that idea. Quiet, untouched, away from all the noise and phone signals. Sounded like the perfect place to pitch a tent for a couple nights and clear my head. The road was rough getting in. I parked my old Vauxhall about a mile and a half away from where the trail split into the trees, just off a narrow lane that barely saw a car all day. From there, it was just me and my backpack. Tent, sleeping bag, a cheap camping stove, some tins of beans, jerky, a flask of tea, and a decent-sized knife I always brought with me when going remote. It took me the better part of 2 hours to get deep enough in where the trees started thinning and I saw the ground dip down toward what used to be the quarry floor. It was bigger than I expected, but not as deep. I figured it might have been active 30 or 40 years ago. The pit was filled in with soft moss and layers of brambles and wet clay. All around it was thick tree cover, and I couldn't see a single soul in any direction. I loved it. The sun was still out when I set up camp on a flat bit of stone near the edge of the pit, slightly elevated. From there, I could see the shallow water that had gathered over the years in the lowest parts of the quarry. Probably rainwater, I figured. There was a lot of standing water mixed with algae and patches of grass growing through the silt. Some insects buzzed above it, and I could see birds settling into the trees along the edge. It all felt peaceful. Exactly what I came out here for. I had no signal on my phone, but I expected that. I checked the time, 5:17 p.m., and jotted it in my pocket notebook along with a few notes about the location, weather, and layout. I always did that when camping solo. Seemed like a good habit in case anything happened. I wrote down which way I came in from, marked the shape of the rock wall near my tent, and sketched out a simple little map. That night, I ate my beans cold from the tin. I didn't want to bother with the stove on the first night. Afterward, I laid out on my mat with my back against the tent and looked up at the sky. There was no light pollution out here. The stars were sharper than I'd seen in years. By around 11, I zipped into my sleeping bag. The temperature had dropped, and there was a damp chill that crept up from the quarry floor. I kept the knife close to my right side, just inside the flap of the tent. I always did that when I was alone. At some point, I must have drifted off. I woke up sometime later, not to a sound exactly, but a pressure, something in the air. You know how sometimes you wake up and your brain already knows something's wrong before your eyes are open? That's how it felt. The air was too still, too heavy. The usual hum of insects had faded. Even the wind that rustled the trees earlier had gone completely quiet. I sat up slowly, rubbed my face, and listened. My watch read 3:46 a.m. At first, I thought maybe it was an animal. Badgers or deer, maybe. But I couldn't hear any movement. No snapping twigs, no rustling leaves. Just that thick, silent dark pressing in all around the tent. I unzipped the flap slowly and peeked out. The moonlight was dim, but still gave enough glow to make out the quarry edges. My tent sat maybe 15 feet from the drop-off to the floor below. And just beyond that, down in the darker patch near the standing water, I saw something that didn't look natural. It wasn't moving, but it also wasn't part of the rock or the brush. It looked out of place, too smooth, too solid, like a person crouched down, just at the edge of the water. I stayed frozen, staring for what felt like minutes. My eyes adjusted more and I could make out more shape. It looked like a man, broad shoulders, head low, one arm pressed to the ground. He was hunched like he'd just landed hard on his knees, but he didn't move. I waited longer, squinting. Nothing.
No tweet, no chifite, no brefe.
I started to wonder if maybe it was a tree stump or a pile of gear someone abandoned, but something in my gut told me that wasn't it. I pulled back into the tent and stayed still. I didn't fall asleep again. I waited until the sun started to light the edge of the sky, turning the leaves to pale green shapes. Only then did I step back out, barefoot, and stare again at the spot near the water. Nothing. No sign of a person. No marks in the wet clay.
No footprints.
Just flattened grass and algae in spots. like something had knelt or pressed down there. I walked down slowly. My heart pounded harder the closer I got. But the only thing I found was an old, half-buried tin can and a bent bit of metal piping. I chalked it up to my eyes playing tricks, maybe a trick of shadow and shape. Still, I didn't sleep that night and I didn't feel right all day. I stayed near the tent, made tea, read my paperback, and forced myself to calm down. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I still checked the knife every 10 minutes and kept my boots on. That second night, I built a small fire on the stone slab and stayed up until nearly midnight. I watched the Trilene constantly, not because I saw something, but because I felt like something could be watching me. I turned in late, zipped the flap up tight, and left the knife out beside my pillow. At 2:11 a.m., I woke to movement. Not a noise, movement. The ground vibrated just slightly, just enough to register in my spine, like someone heavy had taken a step on solid rock not far away. I sat up so fast the blood drained from my head. I didn't move the flap this time. I just listened. Another vibration, another step, closer. Then it stopped. I could hear breathing, not mine, heavy and slow, like a man trying to stay quiet but worn out from walking. I didn't understand how it could be that close without a sound, but it was just outside the tent. I didn't move. I waited for it to go away, but it didn't. After what felt like hours, the sound faded. I didn't sleep again. In the morning, I stepped out. The fire pit was cold and untouched, but the ground about 3 feet from my tent had prints in the soft dirt.
Bootprints.
Large ones, fresh. I packed up, didn't even eat breakfast. I headed back toward the road, checking behind me every couple minutes. About halfway out, I found something hanging from a low branch. It was my notebook, the one I kept zipped in my bag, pages torn, my little map circled in red ink. I hadn't brought any red pens. I didn't stop moving until I saw my car. The drive back felt longer than the hike in. When I got home, I checked my pack. My spare socks were gone. My spare knife too, just vanished. It's been 4 years now. I don't camp alone anymore, and I never go anywhere I haven't been a dozen times before. I don't know who or what was watching me out there, but they knew I was alone. They got close without ever being heard. They went through my things without leaving a mess. They watched while I slept. They might have just been trying to scare me, or maybe they were waiting for me to stay another night. I think if I had, I wouldn't be here to write this. It was the summer of 2017 when I decided to take a short solo camping trip in Northumberland, a quiet rural region in the northeast of England. I had just turned 32 and was feeling burned out after months of long hours at the auto shop I worked at in Newcastle. I needed a break, just a few days away from the noise, screens, and city roads. I packed light, just my old military tent, sleeping bag, stove, a cooler, a hunting knife I always carried when I camped, and a beat-up torch that had seen better days. I didn't plan to stay at any official site. I wanted real peace away from people. I'd camped in the region before, but this time I chose a more secluded spot near an old, dried-out quarry I'd read about in a hiking forum. It wasn't on any official maps. A guy in the comments had mentioned that it was hidden off a dirt road past Bellingham, surrounded by thick pine woods and open land where no one really went anymore. That sounded perfect. I loaded up the car with supplies and drove out early in the morning. It was a long drive, then a rough 20-minute stretch down a muddy, overgrown path my car barely handled. I parked behind a wall of trees, far from view, and trekked about 10 minutes into the woods before finding a flat area right near the edge of the old quarry. The place had an eerie kind of quiet. No sounds of birds, no rustling from squirrels or rabbits. The quarry pit itself was about 30 feet deep, with jagged stone walls and piles of broken rock at the base. A few stunted trees and brambles had grown in it, but it was mostly bare and forgotten. I set up camp facing away from it, under some thick branches where the wind barely reached. That first night went smooth. I made some noodles on the stove, drank a beer, and sat watching the dimming light through the trees. It wasn't until the second day, around late afternoon, that I noticed something weird. I'd taken a walk deeper into the woods, following a narrow trail that twisted through thick brush. I wasn't tracking anything, just stretching my legs and killing time. About 15 minutes in, I came across a small clearing where it looked like someone had been recently. There was a rusted metal drum, maybe for burning trash, and the faint outline of an old fire pit, long cold. But what struck me was the smell: old smoke, stale, mixed with something else. Couldn't place it. It wasn't rotting meat, exactly, but something sour and chemical like rubber or paint thinner clung to the air. I didn't see any litter or signs of someone living there. Still, it felt off. I backed out slowly and walked back to camp without looking behind me. That night, I kept hearing soft crunches outside the tent. At first, I thought it was just deer or a fox sniffing around. It was common enough. But every time I flicked my torch on and stepped out, there was nothing. No eyes in the beam, no sound of anything running off. Just the same thick silence. At one point, around midnight, I was sure I saw something through the trees. Not clear, just a shape, tall, thin, unmoving. It stood out against the darker shadows, but when I aimed the torch, it was gone. I chalked it up to tired eyes, maybe even nerves from finding that clearing earlier. I didn't sleep much after that. By the third day, I was seriously considering packing up early. I'd come out to clear my head, not to keep checking over my shoulder every few minutes. Still, I decided to stay one more night. I spent most of the day gathering dry wood, cooking up some canned stew, and sharpening my knife just out of habit. Something about the air felt heavier that afternoon, like a storm was coming, though the sky stayed clear. Just before sunset, I heard the first real sound that didn't belong. A dry snap of a branch from deeper in the woods, followed by another a few seconds later. They weren't animal sounds. They were careful, spaced out like footsteps, slow, not rushing or stomping, more like someone trying to stay quiet. I turned off the stove, stood still, and listened. The sounds stopped. I didn't move for maybe 10 minutes. Then I grabbed my knife and my torch and walked the edge of the quarry, half expecting to find someone crouched in the trees. But again, nothing. I started thinking I might be losing it. Maybe isolation was playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just too tense. The sun dipped, and darkness came fast. I sat outside the tent for a while, torch off, just listening. Then, without warning, I heard it again, this time closer. Footsteps on dry leaves. Not many, just 2 or 3, then silence. Then again, closer. I turned on the torch and stood. My eyes scanned every inch between the trees, but again, no movement. I walked in a wide circle around the tent, heart thudding. I didn't yell out. I didn't want to give away my exact spot if someone was out there watching me. Back in the tent, I left the zipper halfway down so I could peek out if I needed to. I didn't bother undressing or getting into the sleeping bag. I just sat there, knife in hand, torch on my lap, waiting. At some point around 2:30 in the morning, I must have drifted off. I woke up to the sound of plastic crinkling. The cooler. I froze, pulse in my throat. I waited, breathing shallow. The sound came again, slow, deliberate tearing. Something was unzipping one of the side pouches on my gear. I didn't switch on the torch. I just slowly reached forward, gripped the zipper of the tent, and pulled it up about 3 inches. I looked through the gap and saw the shape of someone crouched by my gear. Not a bear, not an animal. Person. They were wearing some kind of hood or cap, crouched low back to me. I couldn't see their face. I sat frozen, completely still, watching. They rifled through the side pouch, grabbed something, then stopped, as if they sensed they were being watched. They turned their heads slightly, like they were listening. I eased back, still silent, and gripped the knife tighter. I knew if I made a sound or moved too quickly, they might panic or react. I stayed low, heart hammering. Then, slowly, the figure stood up. They didn't turn toward the tent, but they walked straight to the edge of the quarry, disappearing from my line of sight. I waited 10 seconds, then 20. Nothing. I finally flicked on the torch and stepped out. My gear had been rummaged through. One of the protein bars was missing. A small pocket knife I'd left near the fire pit was gone too. No other damage, nothing slashed. But that didn't comfort me. I walked to the edge of the quarry, light scanning every shadow. The figure was gone. No noise, no sign of them. But I saw something down in the quarry, something small and shiny near one of the boulders. I couldn't tell what it was. I didn't go down there. I didn't want to. I packed up everything by first light. I didn't even make coffee. I just shoved everything in my bag, stuffed the tent down without folding it properly, and hiked straight back to the car. I didn't call the police. I didn't report anything. What would I even say? A stranger took my protein bar in the woods? But that night still sits in my head all the time. The way they moved, the silence, the way they knew exactly where my gear was. They weren't lost. They weren't a hiker or some drifter. They knew that area. The weirdest part? A few weeks later, I went online to look at the old thread about the quarry. The post about it had been deleted. The whole thread was gone. I messaged the guy who posted it. His account didn't exist anymore. Since then, I've still gone camping, but never alone, never off-map. And I always sleep with my knife tucked inside the bag, not beside it, just in case. It was late September of 2013 when I decided to go camping alone for the weekend. I had just turned 34 that summer, and I had taken some time off from my job in Leeds to clear my head. Things at work had been rough. Long hours, pressure to meet deadlines, constant meetings that led nowhere. I needed the kind of silence you can only find far from any town. The kind where your ears almost ring because there's no noise at all. I'd been researching quiet camping spots and found a forested area about 2 hours north of Carlisle, up toward the border. It wasn't part of a national park, just a patch of managed woodland used mostly by logging companies. There were no proper campsites there, just unmarked trails and gravel service roads the logging trucks used. That's what made it perfect. The fewer people, the better. I packed up my car with the usual gear: a small tent, a sleeping bag, food, a headlamp, batteries, a first aid kit, a knife, some maps, and enough water for 2 days. No phone signal out there, but I didn't think I'd need it. I'd left a note at home saying where I was headed just in case. That was the last sensible thing I did. The drive was peaceful. Fields turned to scattered pines, and the pines thickened into deep, dark woods. I followed the GPS until it gave up. Then I relied on a paper forestry map I'd printed off. Eventually, I found the small gravel road I was looking for. There were tire marks in the dirt, but they looked old, maybe from weeks ago. I drove in about 5 or 6 kilometers until the road split. I parked the car off to the side and hiked into the trees another half kilometer, trying to put some space between me and the road. I found a decent clearing tucked between some tall spruces. The ground was soft with pine needles, and it didn't look like anyone had camped there before. No fire rings, no trash, just trees and silence. I set up my tent slowly, taking in the quiet. The only sound was the wind slipping through the branches and the occasional bird call. I cooked some simple food over my little gas burner and then sat on a log for a while, staring into the trees. The sun disappeared early under that dense canopy, and soon the whole place was black. I lay in my sleeping bag and tried to relax, but my ears were working overtime. Every creak of a branch or rustle of leaves felt sharper, closer. But I reminded myself that forests sound louder when you're alone. I eventually drifted off. I woke up early the next morning. The air was cold, and the inside of the tent was damp. I brewed a cup of coffee and ate a protein bar, then decided to walk down toward a small stream I'd marked on the map. It was about a kilometer east, a short hike. I brought a small pack with water and a knife, left the tent behind. The woods were beautiful that morning. Golden light breaking through the canopy, mist still clinging to the ferns and moss. I followed deer tracks, saw a fox dash away through the brush, and found the stream without much trouble. I sat by the water for a while, just thinking. But then I noticed something strange. Across the stream, maybe 20 meters away, I saw a set of fresh boot prints in the mud. Deep ones, like someone heavy had been walking along the bank recently. They weren't mine. I hadn't crossed over. They led upstream and disappeared into the undergrowth. That wouldn't have been odd in a public park. But I hadn't seen a single person since leaving the main road. No cars, no hikers, nothing. And this wasn't a scenic trail. It was dense, out of the way. What was someone doing walking along the stream here? I crouched and listened. Nothing but the water. Still, I shrugged it off. Maybe some hunter or forestry worker. Maybe even a lost hiker. I wasn't in the mood to let paranoia ruin my trip. I walked back slowly, but I kept checking behind me. By the time I reached camp, it was late morning. I sat down again, checked my gear. Everything seemed fine, but something kept tugging at me. That uneasy feeling didn't leave. I couldn't shake the image of those boot prints. Something about them felt wrong, like whoever made them hadn't been moving casually. The spacing was off. They were staggered and deep, almost like they'd been dragging their feet or limping. That night, things got worse. I went to bed early again around 8 p.m. because the woods get dark fast. Around midnight, I woke up. Not from a noise, not from cold. I just woke up. My whole body felt tense, like I had stopped breathing in my sleep. I lay there, staring at the roof of the tent, listening. Then I heard it. A single, sharp crack like a branch snapping. Not close, not far either. My heart started pounding. I held my breath and listened harder. Nothing. Then, after a long pause, another snap. Closer this time. Not a falling branch. It sounded like footsteps. Heavy ones. Moving slowly. I turned off the headlamp. The tent was pitch black. I stayed still, barely breathing. The sound came again. This time it was unmistakable. One footstep, then another. Crunch. Crack. Stop. Then nothing. I lay there for what felt like an hour. No more sounds came. At some point, I must have fallen asleep from exhaustion or fear, because I opened my eyes again and it was morning. Birds were chirping. The sun was coming through. I scrambled out of the tent and looked around. There were no tracks, nothing obvious. But 20 feet away, behind a tree, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. A small, round tin can. Old, dented. It hadn't been there before. It was sitting on top of a patch of moss, clean and dry, like someone had placed it there. It looked like a meat tin. No label. That was enough. I packed my gear fast, my hands shaking. As I rolled up the tent, I kept looking over my shoulder. I didn't hear anything, but I felt watched. I hiked back to the car and threw everything in the boot. As I started the engine, I glanced back at the tree line. Nothing moved, but that feeling stuck with me. Something was there. I drove straight out, faster than I should have on that gravel. When I got back to the main road, I didn't stop until I hit a service station with people. I sat there for almost an hour, just trying to settle my nerves. I never reported anything. What would I even say? I hadn't seen a person, but I knew someone was out there, someone walking near that stream, someone who came to my camp at night, someone who left that can as a message or maybe as a warning. I never went back to that area. I started camping in more popular places where other people were nearby. Crowds don't bother me anymore. I'd rather hear kids playing or dogs barking than wake up to silence and strange footsteps. Looking back, I don't think I was in danger the first night. But the second, that night when something came closer to my tent, I don't think it was curious. I think it was waiting, maybe watching to see if I'd leave, maybe hoping I wouldn't. I don't scare easily, but that trip changed how I see the woods. I still love camping, but I'll never again camp near logging roads, deep in some forgotten forest, where no one can hear you if something goes wrong, because someone else was out there that weekend, and they weren't camping. I was 34 when I decided to take some time off work and get away from everything for a bit. I'd been working long hours at a logistics company in Des Moines, Iowa, and I'd hit that point where the days blurred together, and I couldn't remember the last time I felt rested. It was early September 2016 when I loaded up my truck and drove out west toward Montana. I wasn't looking for a fancy campground or RV park. I wanted something remote, something that would let me disconnect from everything and everyone. I chose the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest, about 40 miles south of Butte. I'd read a few posts online about how wide and empty it was out there. That's exactly what I was looking for. I wanted long hikes, quiet nights, and the kind of silence you only get in the middle of nowhere. I brought everything I needed: a good tent, plenty of food, a portable stove, bear spray, a hatchet, a .357 revolver, and a few books. I didn't bring my phone. I left it in the glove box, powered off. I parked off a small forest road that branched off Highway 43. After about 2 hours of slow, bumpy driving on dirt trails, I found a flat spot near a dry creek bed that looked good enough to set up camp. It was surrounded by thick pines and some old, gnarled brush that looked like it hadn't moved in years. No signs of other people.
No tire marks.
No beer cans or plastic. It looked untouched. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and boiled water for some dehydrated chili. The first night was peaceful. Cold, but peaceful. I listened to the wind move through the trees and watched the fire until my eyes got too heavy to keep open. The stars were so clear it didn't even look real. The second day, I hiked a narrow game trail that led deeper into the woods. I didn't see much, just some deer tracks, a few squirrels, and one elk in the distance. I got back to camp late in the afternoon and started preparing for another quiet night. I didn't notice anything off at first. Nothing strange, but when I was lying in my tent later, listening to the night settle in, I thought I heard something out in the trees. It wasn't much, just a soft crunch, like a boot on dry pine needles. I sat up and stayed still for a long time. My ears were working overtime, trying to separate the sounds of the wind from something unnatural. I didn't hear it again, so I figured it was a raccoon or something, maybe a porcupine. Still, it got me just paranoid enough to keep the revolver closer to me that night. The next morning, something felt different. I woke up with this tight feeling in my stomach, like I wasn't alone anymore. I shook it off. Maybe I was just rattled from the noises. I made breakfast, hiked again, and chopped more wood. When I came back from the creek that afternoon with water, I saw something that made me freeze. There were marks in the dirt near my tent. I'd swept the area clear the day before to make it easier to spot animals, and now there were new prints. They weren't from a bear or a deer. They were boot prints. A human had walked through my camp while I was gone. I looked around for more tracks, scanned the tree line, and listened. Nothing. I walked a slow, wide circle around the area and didn't see anyone.
No noise.
No movement, just those damn prints. I told myself it might have been an old hiker passing through, maybe a hunter. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But the tracks weren't leading to anywhere. They just circled the tent once and walked off into the woods in a direction with no trail. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat up with the fire burning low and my revolver in my lap. I didn't hear anything until just past 1 a.m. That's when I saw the light. It was faint and far off through the trees, like someone shining a flashlight just out of reach. It wasn't moving. It just stayed there like whoever held it was watching. I didn't move. I didn't look directly at it. I just sat there in the dark, staring at it from the corner of my eye. After a few minutes, it went out. No sound, no movement, just dark again. I packed up before sunrise. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just shoved everything into my truck, double-checked my revolver, and got the hell out of there. The sun was barely peeking over the ridgeline when I started driving back toward the main road. Took a while. Those forest roads aren't fast. Every few minutes I'd check my mirrors, half expecting to see someone walking down the middle of the trail behind me. About 20 minutes into the drive, I saw something up ahead in the trees. At first I thought it was just an old stump, but as I got closer, I realized it was a man. He was standing maybe 15 feet from the edge of the trail, not moving. He was dressed in dark clothes, jeans and a hooded jacket, and he wasn't holding anything, just staring at my truck as I rolled past. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I kept driving until I hit the gravel road that led back to the highway, and I didn't breathe right until I saw another car on the road 2 hours later. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone the full story. Just said the trip was cut short. Something about that man, the prince, and the flashlight didn't sit right. I've camped dozens of times, alone with friends in national parks and in the deep woods. I know what an animal looks like. I know what normal feels like, and that wasn't normal. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I started looking up missing person reports in that part of Montana. I didn't find anything recent, but I did find some old message board posts, probably 8 or 9 years old, about other campers seeing strange things in that forest. Things like campsites being tampered with, lights in the woods, silent figures standing far off in the trees. No one ever got hurt, at least not in the stories I found, but it all sounded too familiar. I haven't gone back since. I still camp, but I stick to busier areas now. Places with other people around. Places with cell reception. I've never been able to explain what happened in that forest. I didn't see a weapon. I didn't hear a voice. But the way that man stood there, just far enough into the trees to stay hidden, and the way he moved without a sound, it felt wrong. It felt like I'd stumbled into something I was never supposed to see. And whatever it was, it knew I was there. I think the only reason nothing happened is because I left fast enough. I really believe that if I'd stayed another night, if I hadn't trusted that tight feeling in my gut, I wouldn't have made it out. Not because of ghosts, not because of monsters, but because of people. People who choose places that are so empty no one hears the screaming. I still carry the revolver when I go out, not because I want to use it, but because I'd rather have it than not. And I still check my campsites twice, sometimes 3 times, because out there, far from roads and phones and lights, you're only as safe as your instincts. And if something feels wrong, it probably is. I was 31 when I took a solo hunting trip into northern Alberta. It was October 2014, just cold enough for frost in the mornings, but still bearable to sleep outside without a heater. I had been planning it for months, saving up time off work, organizing my gear, and studying maps of Crown land deep in the bush. I wasn't new to the outdoors. I grew up going on hunting trips with my dad every fall. But this was the first time I decided to do it all alone. I picked a place about 5 hours north of Edmonton, way past where paved roads end. It wasn't marked on most maps, just a dotted trail that showed up on some forestry records. I wanted remote. I wanted to get away from everything. The idea was to camp for 4 nights and hunt for whitetail and maybe moose if I got lucky. The trail I followed into the woods was barely visible, mostly flattened brush and the odd notch cut into a tree. I drove my pickup as far as I could until the wheels threatened to sink into a patch of soft mud. Then I grabbed my gear and walked the rest of the way. I had a 65-liter pack with all my essentials, a bolt-action .308, and a sidearm. I brought a lightweight one-man tent and enough food to last the whole trip if I didn't manage to get anything. By late afternoon on the first day, I found a decent place to set up. Flat ground, a little ridge behind it, and thick trees all around to block the wind. I set up camp, started a small fire, and ate a can of stew. As the sky darkened, I sat on a stump and listened. No engine noise, no people, just wind in the trees and the occasional snapping branch from some distant animal. It was exactly what I wanted. Peace, solitude. The first 2 days were quiet. I did a loop around the area, trying to spot tracks or signs, checking game trails and looking for droppings. I found a few fresh marks, likely deer, and even saw a cow moose on the second evening, but it was out of range and moving fast. I didn't care much. I liked being out there more than I cared about tagging something. But it was on the third morning that I noticed something off. I woke before dawn like usual. There was frost on the inside of my tent. I boiled water for coffee and stood by the fire, warming my hands. That's when I saw something strange on the edge of the clearing. It was a footprint. It looked fresh, real fresh. It wasn't mine. I could tell by the shape and the tread pattern. Mine were Vibramsol's deep, jagged patterns. This one had a different design, thinner lines, more rounded. It was smaller too, probably someone lighter than me, maybe shorter. The weird part was that it hadn't been there the night before. I would have seen it. I always checked my surroundings. I followed the print for a bit, but it disappeared quickly into harder ground. Still, the idea of someone else being out there, so far from any roads, in a place not even on most maps, didn't sit right with me. It wasn't illegal to be out here, but it was rare. I hadn't heard a single engine or voice in 3 days. That evening, I stayed closer to camp. I didn't light a fire, just sat in the dark, watching, listening. I heard something around 10 p.m. crunching leaves. It wasn't an animal. The pattern was wrong. Animals move differently. This was slow, 2 steps, then a pause. Another 2, then nothing. I held my rifle and sat completely still, back against a tree. I couldn't see anything. Whatever it was, it didn't come closer. Eventually, it faded into the distance, or maybe it stopped. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I found more prints, this time circling my tent. They were the same ones from before. The ground was soft with dew, and the prints were sharp. That meant whoever it was had come through sometime between midnight and dawn. That thought turned my stomach. I packed up and moved camp about half a kilometer west. Found a little hollow beside a rocky hill and set up again. I stayed there the rest of the day, barely moving, just listening and watching. I didn't fire a single shot. Didn't care about hunting anymore. That night, around 1 a.m., I heard something again. A stick snapped, then another, then silence. I clicked off the safety on my rifle and stayed inside the tent, listening with my heart thumping in my ears. This time, I didn't hear footsteps, just the occasional creak or rustle like someone barely moving, maybe crouching, maybe watching. I didn't move till daylight. When I finally unzipped the tent and stepped out, I saw something that stopped me cold. There was a strip of cloth hanging from a branch just 10 feet from where I slept. It was camo fabric, cut unevenly, like it had been torn off. I looked around. More tracks, same tread. Someone had come back during the night. Again. But this time, they left something behind. That was it for me. I packed everything in less than 10 minutes. I didn't eat, didn't drink, just got moving. Rifle in one hand, pack on my back, I followed the trail back toward where I left the truck. The woods felt tighter. Every sound felt sharp and close. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone stepping out from behind a tree. When I reached the spot where I had parked, I stopped dead. There were more prints around the truck. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I left a general plan with a friend in Calgary, just the region, nothing exact. The only people who knew where I was would have had to stumble across me randomly in miles of forest. Unless they'd followed me in, tracked me. The truck was untouched. Nothing broken or stolen, just watched. I drove nonstop until I hit a town called Whitecourt, booked the first motel I found and locked the door twice. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, thinking about everything. I kept asking myself if I imagined it, if it was just another hunter. But something about the way they stayed silent, the way they came close at night, the strip of cloth, it wasn't normal. A few weeks later, I looked up missing persons reports from that region. Nothing recent, nothing that explained it. But I did come across a small article buried in an old hunting forum from a guy who had camped up near the same area back in 2010. He mentioned finding the same style of footprints. He said he caught a glimpse of someone watching him from a ridge on the third night and packed up right after. He never went back. Neither did I. Since then, I've stuck to places where I can see headlights in the distance, where the nearest person isn't hiding behind a tree. I still hunt, but never alone, and never without telling 3 people exactly where I'm going. That trip changed the way I look at the woods. It made me realize that the scariest thing out there isn't the animals or the weather. It's people. The kind that don't want to be seen. The kind that watch. The kind that wait and never say a word. I went camping alone near an old, dried-up quarry in Arizona back in the fall of 2014. I was 34 years old at the time and had just gone through a rough patch in life. I quit my job 2 months earlier after an argument with my boss that boiled over, and the stress of city life had been chewing me up for years before that. I lived in a cheap apartment on the edge of Phoenix and had been telling myself I needed a reset. I figured a few nights out in nature might help me clear my head. I'd been camping alone plenty of times before. I wasn't scared of being on my own out in the wild, especially in Arizona, where the air gets dry, the nights are dead quiet, and the scenery is wide open. I liked that kind of space. It made my mind slow down. I chose a place about 2.5 hours north of Phoenix, a dried-up rock quarry out near Cordes Junction. The place hadn't been in use since the 70s, and it sat far enough from the highway that it felt cut off from the world. I'd read about it in a local hiking blog. The guy who wrote it said he'd stumbled onto the quarry while looking for agates and other minerals in the area. Said it was eerie but peaceful. I loaded up my old 2003 Toyota Tacoma with camping gear, a cooler, extra gas, and enough food for 4 days. No cell service up there, so I brought a compass, physical maps, and my .38 revolver just in case. Not because I expected trouble from animals, there's not much up there except coyotes and snakes, but people are always the bigger concern in remote places. I got up there around late afternoon on a Thursday. The sun was starting to dip, and the shadows over the rocks made the place feel colder than it really was. The quarry itself was dug into a low plateau. There were layers of sediment and old rusted tracks where they'd probably moved or are stone decades ago. A few abandoned buildings, metal shacks with their roofs caved in, sat on the upper edge of the site. I didn't go near them. They looked brittle and unsafe. I parked my truck on a flat piece of land about 200 yards from the quarry's edge. I figured that was far enough to avoid any loose ground, but close enough that I could explore it the next day without wasting time. I set up camp facing away from the quarry, toward the long stretch of desert scrubland. The first night was uneventful, cold, quiet, Not even the usual desert wind that whistles through low hills at night. It was completely still. I stayed up for a while watching the stars and fell asleep to the sound of dry gravel crunching under my sleeping bag whenever I shifted. It was the second day that things started to feel strange. I woke up just after sunrise, made coffee with my little propane stove, and spent the morning walking the outer edge of the quarry. The air had that smell I always associate with sun-baked dirt and rust. There were strange tire marks that looked relatively fresh, maybe a week old. I followed them for a while and noticed they curved around the eastern lip of the quarry before vanishing near a slope of loose shale. That side of the pit had partially collapsed at some point, maybe from erosion or just years of neglect. Nothing seemed particularly off, but I made a note of it in my little notebook. By early afternoon, I was sweaty and dusty, so I went back to camp to relax and drink water. Around 3 or 4 p.m., I started hearing something that sounded like metal shifting, very faint. I couldn't tell where it was coming from exactly. Maybe the old buildings, maybe inside the quarry itself. But it was rhythmic, like a door opening slowly on rusted hinges, then slamming shut. I walked in the direction of the sound, but never found the source. It faded each time I got close, almost like it was being deliberately moved or timed to stay just out of reach. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking I heard someone walking around just past the edge of camp. Very soft footsteps, crunching rocks slowly, like they were trying not to be noticed. I got out of my tent twice with my flashlight and checked the area, sweeping the light in wide arcs. Nothing.
No footprints.
No animals. But then I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A small pile of stones stacked neatly near the back of my truck. 5 stones balanced carefully, like a cairn. I hadn't made it. I hadn't seen it that morning. It looked fresh, still had damp dirt stuck between the rocks. I kicked it over and stood there for a long while listening to the wind. But there was no wind. On the 3rd day, I walked into the quarry itself. It was deeper than I thought, about 70 or 80 feet at its lowest point. The rock walls had collapsed in places, leaving sharp ledges and loose slides. I climbed down slowly, watching my footing, careful not to break anything. At the bottom, I found an old concrete foundation with metal rods sticking out. Maybe the base of a machine that had been removed years ago. And there, right in the center of the concrete, was another pile of stones. Same height, same shape as the one near my truck. I didn't touch it. I stared at it for a while, uneasy. The silence down there was heavier, almost like the sound was being swallowed up. I climbed out faster than I'd gone in and didn't return for the rest of the trip. That afternoon, I thought about packing up and heading out early, but something in me said I was being paranoid. I told myself it could have been another camper, someone messing around, even though I hadn't seen another soul in 2 days. That night, I barely slept. I stayed in the tent with the flap unzipped and the revolver in my hand. Around 2 a.m., I heard the sound again. Footsteps, slow, crunching the gravel, then stopping, then starting again. I circled my tent once, paused behind it, then circled again the other way. I burst out of the tent with the flashlight and gun drawn. Nothing. But when I turned back toward the tent, I saw another stone pile, this one right next to where I had slept. At that point, I'd had enough. I didn't care if it made me look crazy. I packed my gear right then and there, threw everything into the bed of the truck in the dark, fumbling with ropes and dragging the tent half-collapsed into the back. I started the engine, turned the truck around, and drove out without even checking the map. The road back was rough, just dirt and packed sand. My headlights caught something moving off to the right, too quick to be a person, too tall to be a coyote. It vanished into the brush before I could get a good look. I drove for over an hour before I got back to pavement, and even then, I didn't stop until I was halfway to Phoenix. Back at home, I scrubbed the truck down, repacked my gear, and tried to forget about the quarry. But a few days later, I noticed something wedged under the back bumper. A rock. Small. Clean. Not dusty or scraped. Just one. I tossed it in the garbage and didn't go camping again for over a year. When I finally did, I made sure it was a public site with people around, cell service, and clear trails. I never went back to that quarry. I don't know who or what was leaving those stones. I didn't find any signs of animals, and I never saw another person while I was out there. Could have been someone living out there, someone hiding, maybe a squatter, maybe a drifter who didn't want company, or maybe just someone who liked scaring people off. Either way, it worked. I got the message, loud and clear.